Well, good evening. Welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here. Thank you for coming out tonight and for what promises to be a very interesting discussion with our guest, David Helfrey. As usual, we have guests attending in person here, everybody in the room, thank you, as well as people tuning in to the live stream. So welcome to everyone, whether you're at home or at work or whether you're here in person. David Helfrey was a member of the U.S. Justice Department's Organized Crime Strike Force in Kansas City and successfully prosecuted the famous Operation Strawman cases against mafia leaders in Chicago, Cleveland, Milwaukee, and Kansas City in the 1980s. That will be the focus of our discussion tonight. In more recent years, David has been in private practice, and today he lives in Las Vegas. All roads lead to Las Vegas, right? People end up here. Please welcome David Helfrey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I'm sure many people here are familiar with the basic outline of the Strawman case, either from your reading, from watching the movie Casino, or from previous programs here at the museum. But tonight is special. It's a little bit different because we are going to delve into the details of the case through the eyes of the man who spearheaded the prosecution, which ultimately led to the downfall of a large number of prominent mobsters, including people we all are familiar with in our museum. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to dive right in because there's so much to cover. We won't get everything, but we're going to try to hit a lot of the highlights, and then, of course, you'll have your opportunity to ask questions afterward. We have the microphone on the side, and look forward to hearing from you as well as people online. Why don't we start somewhat at the beginning, David, and how did you become involved with the Justice Department and ultimately with the strike force?
All right. Serendipity, largely. I was stationed in Korea in the Army. I was a military judge there. The colonel for one day suggested to me or said to me that since I had married an Asian, I would have to stay in the Army for a career. That didn't sit well with me. It really made me angry, actually. Following week, I went back to the States to start interviewing for a job. I went to D.C. as part of that and went into the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission. It's an all-day interview. The morning session was so boring, I just said, I'm not going back. I don't want to work here anyhow. So I'm walking around D.C. I don't know what I'm going to do. And, oh, there's the Department of Justice across the street. I think I'll go in there. I don't have a resume or anything. And so I go in there, and they hire me for the Organized Crime Strike Force, which I ultimately became the attorney in charge of. And that's how it has started for me.
And how did you end up in Kansas City?
That was another serendipity. They said, where do you want to go? I'm from Chicago, born and raised, and went to Northwestern Law School there. And I said, well, I know Chicago. How about this place, Kansas City, where I've never been before? So I ended up there. No real planning.
You got a little more detailed in your planning later on.
Yeah. It's other people's lives I plan carefully, but my own I don't.
So let's talk about how the Strawman cases came together. This whole thing started, you know, I know there was investigations before this, but this particular case kind of started in 1978 based on a chance discovery during a murder investigation in Kansas City. Can you talk about how that all kind of started?
Yeah. A couple of one of the groups that made up the Kansas City Mafia were the Spiros, and they had some control over some of the local Teamsters unions. And the dispute became more and more violent. Explosions where people are flying through the air and up sides of buildings, people being shot, attempts on Nick Savella, the head of the family in Kansas City, life, that type of thing. And so we started going out and investigating that, and one of the places where they used to meet to have private discussions was at the Villa Capri restaurant, not far from downtown. And one day, Cork Savella, who's Nick's brother, and Carl DeLuna, who was the underboss in Kansas City, were there. And also, I thought it was Barbara Streisand, but the FBI insists that it was the Bee Gees were singing in the background. And so we heard, "Genius, Teamsters, 22, 21, crazy." Isolated phrases like that, from which we discerned, and Las Vegas, we discerned that there was something big going on there, that this was a fairly significant conversation. And so then we began to start checking with the other strike forces, Chicago and Vegas in particular, and started doing more surveillances. So we got ourselves up on, for example, the Breckenridge Hotel, where Carl DeLuna would drive to. And it turned out what we did to get probable cause is we had two clerks from the FBI office, two female clerks, and they went out there and tried to listen to what DeLuna was saying and pretending they're on the phone, and one of them was just with her friend, kind of routine. Enough information was developed that we were able to get the court to authorize the electronic surveillance. So we started blanketing Kansas City, fewer ones in Chicago, none in Cleveland, and some here in Las Vegas. And that sort of was the impetus for all of it.
I think we should take just a half a step back and talk about the organized crime strike forces and when they were created and what was their purpose.
There was a recognition in Washington. Robert Kennedy was Attorney General when the impetus started, that if you're really going to do, it had the Kefauver hearings in '57. Kennedy gets elected in '61 or somewhere around there, and so the recognition that you need to have concentrated effort if you're really going to take down a group like the Kansas City mob or any other mobs as well. The U.S. Attorney's offices they got more manpower and woman power, but they have so many cases, they're not able to just set their lives aside like I was able to do from 1978 to 85, 86. And so that was the idea. And they were composed of attorneys, all trial attorneys, and their mandate and limitations were traditional organized crime, mafia. Each of the federal investigative agencies would assign somebody to the strike force, IRS, ATF, DEA, so on. And then we had a whole squad of FBI agents that had nothing to do but organized crime. About 12 agents, if I remember correctly. The trick was to not alienate the U.S. Attorney, and I had good relationships with the U.S. Attorney's office. I kept them apprised and so on and so forth. Didn't try to steal the publicity and that kind of stuff because it wasn't very important to me personally. But others weren't quite as successful in maintaining good relationships with the U.S. Attorney, who was a political appointee. So that's the essence of it. We would set policy. We would take leads would come to us from the agencies, and we would do the investigative work in the grand jury, do the prosecutions, any attorney work that needed to be done. But also, with the FBI in particular, I was very close, and I would come up with ideas of mine and try to get them to follow those up. I would help develop witnesses on my own. I'm not easy fellow to control, as the Army found out. It was a very good program as long as everybody worked together and had the support and confidence. And trust is a big issue in that field as well. And we also got along very well with the judges. I could go into their offices and talk to them anytime without an appointment and things like that, because I developed a relationship and a reputation. And my predecessor, he didn't get along so well with one of the judges, who was chief judge at a point in time. Years later, I found out the reason is because he had been the judge's law clerk, and then when he came to Kansas City to lead the strike force, he didn't call on the judge. The judge got really upset about that and then took it out on us in the courtroom. We could do nothing right until I was able to, Mike left and I took over, and we were able to mend that relationship.
Thank you. So the strawman case is coming together. What are you discovering on these wiretaps and these bugs? There's skimming going on in Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah. Major skimming, we're identifying the parties here in Vegas that were involved in the skim. We're identifying the amount of skim sometimes, not so much on the electronic surveillance. That came later. And then we're finding that it spreads to Chicago. We're learning that Frank Ballesteri, the head of the mob in Milwaukee, is involved. We hear that Macy Rockman, who was married to the only Peckerwood that I know of in the Mafia, I don't think he was a maid member, but he was married to the boss's daughter, and he got him special privileges, I guess. And so it all starts coming together. You pick up conversations. We picked up the Marlowe tape. I think that was in maybe November of '78, where they explicitly, before the representatives from Vegas come, you got 3 or 4 of the maid members and leaders, the top leaders of the Kansas City Mafia, discussing the Spiro antagonism and the killing them all. Then when Joe Agosto shows up, who was at the Tropicana, I still remember the Follies Bergère sign, managed by Joe Agosto.
Executive producer.
Yeah, executive producer, and Carl Thomas. Carl Thomas was, the new breed in Las Vegas. Somebody who was honest, intelligent, who could speak English past the 3rd grade level, and well thought of locally. But he's there telling them how you skim and why it has to be this way and that way, and here's the alternatives and all of those things in very much detail for about an hour and a half or so. So it was a tremendous tape.
And incidentally, if I might interrupt, so, and many of you know this, on the first floor of this museum, we have an excerpt from that with Carl Thomas talking about how the skim went down at the Tropicana. So it goes around, comes around.
Exactly. So, his reputation was ruined, and those who were his supporters, I guess, didn't fare as well either. And Joe Agosto was managing the skim. Thomas people were there at the Tropicana doing the skim, but Joe was running the place. It was owned by Mitzi Stauffer Briggs, who put about $12 million into it and never made a dime. And they took about $1.6 million out of a place that was failing, and took it all back to Kansas City, and then Kansas City would split it up with Chicago. Chicago would give Milwaukee their share, and it depended on certain times Kansas City would take care of Cleveland, other times Chicago would.
And I just want to make sure we clarify this part, because actually in the past week I've only now finally understood this. So there's Operation Strawman, which is the investigation, and it leads to 2 major trials. And the first trial is focused on the Tropicana Hotel. That's 1983. And then you have the Argent case, which is the Stardust and the Fremont and the Marina and the Hacienda, and that's the second case, and that's 1985. But it's all one investigation, right?
That's right. And the straw man covered both of them. And a lot of the evidence was the same. I mean, Joe Agosto, for example, when Glick was told he had to sell the Argent Corporation, Joe Agosto was trying to funnel Kansas City people in to make the purchase from them, that type of thing. So the Breckenridge is not only producing stuff on the Tropicana, it's also producing stuff on the Argent case.
I have Joe mentioned later in my notes, but I think we should hit him now. Can you talk a little bit about working with Joe Agosto, because he ends up becoming a witness for you?
Joe is an illegal, came from Italy, He still denied it up until the time he died, but he was an illegal. He was a great cook, great personality. You like him automatically. He got himself crosswise. Dale Gustafson had owned the shop for a while. He was out of Minneapolis, a banker out of Minneapolis. Joe got caught up in some deals with Gustafson. He ends up being tried in Minnesota, convicted. I thought that was a great opportunity, so I flew up to Minneapolis and just walked in on him while he was in jail and said, gee, I think you ought to think about this and cooperate because you're going to need some help. And also, I'm going to indict you in Kansas City. And I did. And so he came around. But a very charismatic guy, but not to be trusted. And the FBI made a little mistake. We kept him at a motel over in Kansas and had agents staying with him to provide security and also keep him from flying away. But they started leaving shotguns in the corner and things like that. And Joe was on the phone with a guy named Urick saying, gee, I need to get out of here. Can you bring the jet up and I'll get out of this place and fly away. Fortunately, it didn't happen, but he was discussing it, and that would have been a disaster if he had gotten away with that.
Thank you. So what we're talking about here is the volume of electronic surveillance is really substantial. I read in one article 4,000 hours of recorded conversations in 5 different states.
At the time, this was one of the longest periods of electronic surveillance in the history of the country. And 4,000 hours, I'm sure at least that much, if not more. And it's got to be staffed. I mean, the FBI office in Kansas City was burdened pretty heavily. And so we're bringing people in from Washington and other offices to man the electronic surveillance monitoring, to do typing on the of the transcripts, and giving us raw intelligence as it came in, as opposed to a month later or something. And we needed to know what's the next place we ought to be putting a microphone in, or what other phones should we be tapping. And so, and what other leads we should be following, witnesses and things of that sort, or informants. And I mean, it was a massive effort, and I'm talking 78 to 86, or 85, mid-85, where I did nothing but that case, essentially, even though I was in charge of the whole strike force. Yeah, no, it was a massive undertaking, and we got great support out of the FBI in Kansas City, and lifelong friendships. Unfortunately, now some of them have all died, but so the lifelong friendships have ended.
Now, one of the things that I know characterizes these tapes are they were using nicknames for everybody.
Yes.
And how you had to figure out who was who, right?
We were able to figure out, for example, that first intercept, the one where the Bee Gees are singing, or Barbra Streisand. I still like that better. But we were able to figure out some of it. They used the word Teamsters, so we knew there was a relationship between the mob, the Teamsters, and Vegas, and that skimming was going on. And so we could, by process of elimination, figure out genius was Alan Glick. He started out as a young real estate executive in the San Diego area, became very wealthy doing that. I lost my train of thought there.
Some of the nicknames.
Oh, the nicknames. So we were able to do it, and then you can also do it by surveillance. But at this point in time, we don't have Carl DeLuna's notes.
That's where we're going next.
Okay, well, let me touch on that because it's relevant. DeLuna was the underboss, number 2 in Kansas City. he would make detailed notes. And when I say detailed, I mean detailed notes of every meeting and who was there, what they did, what they discussed, how much skim money was involved, that type of thing. But to try to evade in case somebody else saw it that shouldn't see him, he used code names. 22 was Iupa, the head of the Chicago mob, and so on. He had code names for everybody, and sometimes more than one code name for people. He called himself C. Dogman, Zoppo, and Mr. C. I don't know why, but most of them made sense. You know, Legs was Pete Tamburello, who was a big guy with long legs. And so after the search, we've got a roadmap on everything that happened. And it was easy enough for us to figure out who these people were because, you know, there's a surveillance here, and it's Nick Savella and Cork and DeLuna and X, and the next surveillance of a meeting, Nick Savella isn't there, and Cork isn't there. It's just DeLuna, X, and Y. And so process of elimination was pretty simple to put that together, and the jury certainly believed it, and I know they did. Carl DeLuna actually pled guilty. He knew he was done.
A couple of interesting facts about that raid on Carl DeLuna's house. First of all, it happened on February 14th, 1979. Valentine's Day. So presumably Carl and his wife were going to have a nice Valentine's Day dinner, but didn't work out. Because it ties in with the Mob Museum's anniversary, right? But the other thing was, how many times have, if you've been to multiple events here at the Mob Museum, you'll hear speakers, including me, talk about how, one of the hardest things about the history of the mob is that they don't take notes, right? Like, there's no records to know exactly what they were doing. There is one exception, Carl DeLuna, who kept the most meticulous notes in the history of the mob.
And told the whole story for us. I mean, it was truly amazing. And Bill Owsley, the FBI agent, had him testify to the notes and show them to the jury and all of that. Powerful evidence, and the electronic surveillance corroborates it, the physical surveillance corroborates it. I don't think anybody had any doubts. And a lot of the Cork Savella pled guilty. Nick died, which was a disappointment. I'd rather have convicted him. So yeah, it took up all of our time, but it was well worthwhile and a lot of fun.
You mentioned it earlier, just in reference in passing, but the Teamsters Union, how does it fit into this story?
Okay, I'm going to give you my thesis. Basically, you'll find that in almost all major cities, the Teamsters local have strong influence or outright control by the mob. And I can give you examples of that, and so therefore I will. Roy Williams, you may have heard of him. He was the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters for a period of time within this period of the investigation. One day he was down at the city market in Kansas City talking to Cork Savella, Carl Cork Savella. City market, very close to the federal courthouse and downtown Kansas City. And things seemed to be getting tense. And all of a sudden, slap! Carl Savella slaps him in the face. So we thought, geez, I guess there'll be a response to that. There wasn't, leading to the conclusion that he was controlled by the mob in Kansas City. And ultimately, he gets convicted in Chicago, and then I make him an offer he couldn't refuse, and he comes down to testify in Kansas City. Those types of things. Who else?
Well, the Teamsters, just in general, and their involvement.
My thesis was that the mobs and the pot of money was the Central States Pension Fund. And so to get anything done, you needed to get Chicago, Kansas City, Detroit, other cities to agree to support your request for a loan in this case to Alan Glick, so he can buy the Argent Corporation or buy the Requion Corporation. And he gets $62.7 million out of the Teamsters the first time around. And so, in my mind, the Teamster provided the skeleton, because there isn't a lot of businesses that the mobs work together on. They all do their own deal, and they're all pretty independent-minded. But if you're going to get to that golden pot of money at the pension fund, you had to cooperate. And the payoff was you shared in the proceeds. So that's, in our case, Cleveland controlled a trustee, Kansas City controlled Williams, who was also a trustee, Milwaukee controlled Frank Rainey, Chicago controlled Alan Dorfman, who you may have heard of, who had a lot of strong influence at the pension fund. And so my thesis is, without the mob, you don't have these type of cooperations, and they are more a local problem as opposed to a national problem. Teamsters made them a national problem. And that's sort of my theory. And I think this case helps establish that theory as being real.
You know, and I would just add that, we've talked about this before here at the museum, but you reach a point in the 60s and 70s when the capital needed to build a decent casino here is more than your typical, mob family has in the closet or under the house. And so you need somebody like the Teamsters to provide you with that money to be able to build a 9-story, tower at the Riviera or the Caesar's Palace or whatever it is. And so it's a sort of a perfect match there.
Yeah, well, the mob generally, their position is that they don't play with their own money. They play with your money or the pension fund's money. And so the first thing is always, can we find somebody else to finance this? And it worked very well for Alan Glick. At least he got the money. Didn't work very well long after that, though.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the defendants, and then we'll talk about some of the witnesses, some of whom are the same people. But you've mentioned Nick and Carl, or Corky Savella, a couple of times. Can you talk just a little bit about the Kansas City Mafia and what their role was here and what their influence was?
Well, since they controlled Roy Williams, they had strong influence nationally, because lots of people wanted loans, and a lot of Las Vegas was financed by the Central States Pension Fund. Shortly after this case, or after it's got going pretty good, the Department of Labor, I think, came down and prohibited loans to the Las Vegas by the pension fund.
Well, Kansas City was, how does it's sort of interesting how, you don't think of Kansas, until this case, not that many people talked about Kansas City as a major influence, but here they were.
Yeah, no question, because they had the strongest guy in the Teamsters Union. Cork, his claim to fame was he was the brother of Nick. One of the nicknames they had for him, or code names, was something that suggested he was an idiot, which was pretty close to true. And I had a personal meeting. Nick Savella came up with his bodyguard one day to the offices and said he was a public citizen and therefore he had a right to talk to me. And I said, okay, come on in. So I put him in a conference room. He starts prattling on about anti-Italian and all that. And I tell him, look, Nick, if you kill me, I can promise you there'll be 5 or 6 people who are going to replace me and you're going to regret it. And I said, no, it's time for you to go. No, I'm not finished. Oh, Nick, you're finished. Do you want me to call the marshals? He didn't, so he left. Little things like that. I mean, I tried to be personal with him.
Yeah, in Chicago, you had Joey Aiuppa at the time was the boss. You had Joseph Lombardo, Joey the Clown Lombardo. You had Jackie Cerrone were defendants in this case. Chicago was the main player, essentially, right?
Main player, Kansas City, no question that they treated them gingerly. And, there was a division. The East Coast mobs had Atlantic City, the Midwest had Las Vegas. And Ayup was the boss. He replaces, what was the guy's name? Forgot, doesn't matter.
Giancana, maybe.
Yeah, Giancana. And then the underboss there was this guy, Jackie Cerrone. Joey the Clown was Joey a Clown. He gave me a picture at the end of the case of himself in a workman's outfit, all filled up with dust all over him, and saying something like, "Best of luck, Joey Lombardo." And he gave me another note, and another note where it said, dated it, the date of the note, and said that I hereby confess that I skimmed X millions of dollars from George Washington in 1802. So he was a clown, but personality. The other one I've mentioned is La Pietra, because it's an interesting story on him.
Anthony, right?
Yeah, Anthony La Pietra. He was a street boss, headed up a group of people that did whatever they did. Well, we get to trial, and I start talking to him every day, several times a day, generally. The trial went on for 4 months, which, let me tell you, is a long time to do nothing but that. And after about 6 weeks, I put an agent on the stand, and we had some recordings from Chicago, but nobody could identify the voice. So I asked the guy if he could identify the voice, the agent. He said, yes, it's Angelo La Pietra. Well, how do you know that? How long were you in Chicago? I'd never been. How do you know it? Well, every day you would talk to him in the hallway, and then I would run downstairs and listen to this tape. And I did that for 6 weeks, and that gets it into evidence. It then becomes the weight of the evidence, but it got into evidence. He didn't want to talk to me after that. and so I said to him, Angelo, what'd you think? I was your friend? I'm trying to put you in prison for the rest of your life. It's only business, which, of course, is a term they use after they kill somebody. I wasn't personal. It was only business. So he knew what that meant.
Just to sort of fill out the different cities, Frank Balistrieri in Milwaukee, what was his role?
He was the head of the mob in Milwaukee. He controlled a trustee, and I think it was Frank Rainey. The way it all started on the Glick side, Glick went to Rainey. Rainey sent him to Frank Balistrieri. Frank Balistrieri sent him to his 2 sons, who were lawyers. And the only claim of and the other story on Frank is that I don't know the exact time period, but sometime after the trial, and maybe before he went to prison, I just don't know, he calls me and says he wants to meet. Oh, okay, you want to meet? I'll talk to you Monday. So over the weekend, he dies. I heard murdered, but now and I've talked to an agent who recently about that, and he thinks maybe that might not have been Frank Balistrieri. That might have been an agent putting me on.
Oh, really?
So I don't know which is true, but it was an interesting story, and I thought it was Frank Balistrieri when I took the phone call, and that's who he identified himself as. But
So the fourth city here is Cleveland, and that you can talk a little bit about it, but when you generally think about this case, you don't think about Cleveland, but they were getting their piece too through Milton Rockman, right?
Absolutely.
And why were they involved?
They controlled a trustee also.
Okay, of the Teamsters
pension fund, right?
Okay, and you mentioned him before, but Rockman was kind of an unusual entry.
The mob people refer to non-Italians as peckerwoods, and he's the only one that I know of that was trusted with significant responsibilities. I mean, Carl Thomas would be a technician and a peckerwood. Yes, they'll use all those kinds of people, but not somebody who was actually inside talking about and helping the mob at a high level. And as I said before, it's because he was married to the daughter of Licavoli.
So let's shift gears. Let's talk about the government witnesses. And before we get into specific names, I think what this case really exemplifies is that by the 1980s, the notion of omerta was pretty well obliterated. The idea of of secret, keeping everything secret. These guys were talking a lot. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think a couple things. One, you got to communicate. When a guy like Joe Agosto, for example, he isn't going to be cryptic. His personality is outgoing, bubbly, and he's going to talk. There isn't any way around it. Now, he's not going to talk to the wrong people, but to Carl DeLuna, they didn't have any secrets, or didn't have many secrets. And omerta is a nice ideal. It's like our ideals that everybody's equal, and when we know that ain't true. But it's a nice ideal, but in reality, the sentences people were getting in the 70s and 80s from the mobs were substantial. In this case, some of them got 28 years, a lot of them got 16 years, and so on. And so that's a strong inducement to cooperate or to try to find a way around it. And the only way around it, you got to talk to me. Cork Savella didn't like when he was in prison in the East Coast. Apparently, a large percentage of the prison population was black. And so he calls me one time, collect. And he says, look, I'm not getting any respect here. They don't respect me at all. I need to be moved. I said, well, Cork, you know how that works. You help me, I'll help you. And a few months later, we moved him to Texas. That's how that works. If you don't horse trade and aren't willing to talk with them, you're not going to get them. And they're not going to get a deal. And Joe Agosto, after he got convicted, I actually went into the jail and spoke to him about becoming a witness. And ultimately that proved to be fruitful, and he made a good witness.
So you had some really high-profile witnesses. They weren't necessarily involved in the skim, but they could talk about how the mob worked and everything. So let's start with Angelo Leonardo. He was a Cleveland boss who was one of the first bosses to ever become a witness.
Yeah. He got convicted.
Drugs, I think.
On drugs and some violence, I think. But in any event, he got convicted and looking for help. And so I sat down with him, and this kind of thing we can do. And you're not going to walk scot-free. And so he came in to testify. He made a good witness. And at the time of the trial, a Cleveland magazine came out about Angelo Leonardo and the mob in Cleveland. And so he autographed it for me to, forgot how he phrased it now, but anyway, he autographed it, and I still have it.
Just so you know, I'm writing down the different artifacts that we need to talk about after the program. Jimmy Fradiano.
Jimmy the Weasel.
Jimmy the Weasel.
His job in life was murder, and he was a hitman for hire, and killed a substantial number of people. Again, he got convicted of murder and was looking for a way out, and ran into me, and I agreed that that we would help him if he helped us. And no help from me, though, until you've testified, so I can determine whether you're straight or not. And one of the things I told him was, I don't want any lies. Catch you in a lie, you ain't getting no help. Well, he testifies to the mob structure and some of their interest and the control on some of the Teamsters and things like that. He was close to them. I guess he was from Cleveland, or he stayed a lot of time in Cleveland. And I have him dressed. He's on the stand. I have him dressed in a three-piece suit, and he's very articulate and very bright and very quick. And I still remember one of the attorneys asked him, "You killed those two people right in front of your own mother, didn't you?" And there wasn't a second that went by before he said, "Counselor, you don't understand. They didn't think I'd kill him in front of my mother. They were wrong." And let me tell you, the defense attorney didn't know what to do. And so there's about 45 seconds, a minute goes by, and the jury's over there looking at the defendant saying, "Which one of you assholes," that's my word, hired him to kill those people in front of his mother? I mean, it was devastating for the defense. And I think they believed every word Fradiano had to say after that.
We'll hit a couple more. So Ken Ito, who is he?
Ken Ito ran some gambling for the Chicago mob. And I don't know how he got on the wrong side of them, but he was in a car with a couple of the mob guys, and one of them shot him in the back of the head twice. He survives. It seems highly improbable, but he survives, so he testifies to the structure and the relationships and that type of thing. And I was hoping somebody would say something to him where he could say, "And they shot me in the head," but they didn't, and I didn't bring it out.
You mentioned before, but Roy Williams becomes a witness.
Yeah, Roy got convicted in Chicago and is in jail. And I had a chance to speak with him about doing the right thing. And he became willing to do so and did do so and was a good witness and basically testified to the mob's control over the pension fund and the Teamsters locals. And I have an artifact from him, a big picture of him saying to my favorite prosecutor, Roy Lee Williams.
I'm writing this down. What's another major witness for you was Alan Glick.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that happened?
Yeah, poor Alan Glick. He came to Vegas in '72. I think he started out with I know exactly. Maybe the Hacienda bought into it with some other people. Yeah. He leases the marina, and then he hears about, he makes an offer on a place up in Reno, gold something or other. And then he hears about Recuron Corporation and that it looking for a buyer. And Recuron is the one that owns the Stardust, or did own the Stardust and the Fremont and that type of thing. He had, and you want me to get more detail on him?
Sure.
I mean, he thinks that he's a genius because everybody said he was a genius, and they referred to him as a genius in these notes. And he gets referred into Frank Rainey, as I said, and it goes to Milwaukee, and from Milwaukee goes to Kansas City and Chicago and Cleveland to get the loans done. But he learns fairly quickly that he's not in control. He chastises Frank Rosenthal, who Milwaukee recommended to manage the casino. Rosenthal was a loudmouth and self-important, but smart and knew how to scam money. And he just told him, "Stay out of the casino, I'll run it." Then the next thing that happens of significance, maybe '76, after the purchase, Rosenthal takes him to Kansas City in a private jet, and they go into a hotel room where there was a spotlight, it seemed brighter than that one even, on his face, and Nick is there alone in the dark, so you can't see him. And Nick tells him straight out, "You're a dead man. If you don't allow Frank to run the casinos and you don't interfere, you stay out of the casinos, don't even want you to walk there." So that goes on for a little while. And then people become still unhappy with Glick in the mob world. And so Chicago and Kansas City in particular get together to talk about several times what to do with Glick. And so finally they decide that he needs to sell out. And then they elect Carl DeLuna to relay that to him. So they meet in a law office here in Vegas. Nobody else in the building or in the offices. And Glick tells him, "You're to announce immediately as you're selling out. And within a few days, he does exactly that. So the question becomes, and it's sort of an academic question, was Glick knowledgeable as to what he was stepping into, or was he a dupe? And I'm sure people can line up on both sides of that. But he found out he wasn't in control of anything as a practical matter. And he, of course, having been threatened by some very substantial people with his life, wanted to stay out of it. So I flew out to La Jolla, where he has a nice home with eight-car garage and all that on a hilltop. And we talk, and I'm just feeling him out. And he's not copping to it. So I make a third trip, and I say, Alan, I'm here just to tell you, you got two choices. You're going to be a defendant, or you're going to be a witness. And at this point, I don't care which you choose. Well, you know what he chose. He chose to be a witness, was a good witness. He talked about the Sabella meet in Kansas City, about how he got the loan, all of those types of things, corroborating the notes of DeLuna that we don't have yet. And, or we have it by the time he flips, yeah, we have it then. And made a good face to sort of bring the whole thing together, and therefore he could play the victim if he wanted to, and not the knowledgeable guy that deliberately went into an unholy alliance. He went into an unholy alliance for sure, and I'm sure he regretted it. But the question is, did he really know what he was doing? In my mind. As I say, it's an academic question.
So, and he's still around, so someday we're going to have to bring him here to the museum. We'll ask him that
Good luck.
If you're watching, Alan, that's what we'd like to do. So we've managed to talk about this for 40 minutes without mentioning Tony Spilotro somehow. He was a defendant in this case. How did that all play out?
Well, he was in the Argent case, not the Trop case. I mean, we had the goods on him. They tried to kill Rosenthal. And here's a tidbit for you in case you ever find yourself in that position. When you start your car, leave the door open, which is what he did. The bomb goes off, and it blew him 20, 30 feet from the car. He survived. We were going to talk about Spilotro. The Spilotro was the only one that really beat me, but he did it in a very difficult way. He didn't show up for trial, and so we started trial without him. Warrant for his arrest is issued. And then towards the second or third of the trial, we learned that a farmer, this is starting to come springtime now in '86, farmer found a lump in his land. He was out tilling it or disking it, and he digs it up, and two bodies in there. Spilotro had been sleeping apparently with Rosenthal's wife, and the mob felt they were let down by him, and he did the hole-in-the-wall gang where he's robbing and burglarizing jewelry stores out here and things like that, and tossing himself around like a big shot, even though he was a short guy.
So just to explain, though, so what had happened is his case had been severed from the bigger case, right?
Yeah, it's severed as a practical matter.
And that was Oscar Goodman, his attorney,
Yeah.
had sought that, so they were going to have a separate trial that was going to follow the Argent
Right.
trial.
I mean, we weren't going to delay the trial. Who knows how long it was going to be before we found him and that type of thing. So we went forward. Anyway, to finish that story, he was beaten. He and his brother were in the hole in the ground. The concern on the brother was that he would try to take revenge for the killing of Tony Spilotro, and therefore they killed him too. But first they beat the brother with a baseball bat in front of Tony so he could see all this, and then shot him. And then they beat Tony with a bat and shot him. Interesting footnote is that it was only about 2 miles south of Joey Aiuppa's farm, the head of the Chicago family. They buried him on the wrong property. I don't know if additional people had to be dealt with or not on that. But so yeah, he died an innocent man.
We're about ready to allow everyone here to ask some questions. We've already received a couple of questions from online viewers, so I thought I would start with them tonight because they end up at the end and we run out of time. This is a question from one of our viewers. He says, did you ever hear of any skim money being transported by an armored car during your investigation?
No. There were couriers that did that. Carl Caruso was one that did carry the trop skim back to Kansas City. He was a Las Vegas junket guy. He'd take people out there to gamble, and that was easy for him to carry 40,000 or 80,000 back. So no, I've never heard of that, and I wouldn't think that would be likely. I think that would draw too much attention.
Yeah. I don't know if it was in this case or in earlier cases, did women also serve as couriers?
I don't doubt it, but I didn't identify any that did in this case.
Okay, all right. So this is another question, and I'm not sure of the timing on this, but he asked, what about Gussie Alex, who ran the loop with Jake Guzik? Does this ring a bell?
No.
This is an earlier era, I think.
Yeah, that's not part of the straw man cases.
Jake Guzik was a little bit earlier. All right, so here's one more, and then we have a microphone on the side, so if you have a question, go ahead and get ready for that. The question is one we get a lot, and you might have some thoughts on this. Do you think La Cosa Nostra is still functioning today? Not necessarily in Las Vegas, just in general.
Yeah. I think that on a very low scale, you take Kansas City. We took out the top leadership. That takes away political connections. It takes away the union control. And all you got are the young people who haven't gotten up in the ranks yet. They're reduced to selling drugs now. They don't have any national influence. They don't control anybody. I don't know about Chicago, but again, we took top leadership out of Chicago and several of their street bosses. I got to believe that hurt them a lot because a lot of these things, it's like Roy Williams. The control on him went through Cork. And so other people aren't meeting with him, and the younger people aren't. So you don't have the ability and the politicians that you control. I had a guy named Frazino in Kansas City. You don't have those relationships, and these people, none of them want to be linked to the mob. There isn't any upside for them. They're being slapped in the face and things like that. And so the young kids that don't have the relationships, they can't establish them. I know Kansas City was impacted severely. I can't say that for Chicago because you're talking about Kansas City has 20 people, Chicago has hundreds. But I know it undermined them, and the Teamster connection goes away largely. They may control some of the locals, but they're not controlling the pension fund any longer.
And I would just add that based on the best information that we hear at the museum, you still have the 5 families in New York operating at some level. You have the Chicago outfit operating at some level. Yep. But beyond that, it's pretty. And Buffalo, I guess we just had I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but there was a 5-part series in the Buffalo News about the Buffalo Mafia being revived there. And it's not the football fans. It's an actual criminals. Anyway, good. So if anybody has any questions, please come on up. We've got one of the great experts on this story, so please come on in.
Yep.
I went back for a haircut. My question is, was he part of your investigation, and was it related to his death?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He would have been indicted if he hadn't been killed. And there are DeLuna notes on it, him having meetings with the Kansas City and Chicago people that we know about, things of that nature. So absolutely.
Yep.
And it would well deserved it too.
And of course, that, one of the things about the movie Casino is that it tells this story, essentially, right? But the whole section about this case takes up about, 3 minutes toward the end of the movie. And so it can be hard for the average viewer to kind of pick up on what exactly is going down. But they show the Alan Dorfman hit there, and they show some of these other events that we're talking about, the Carl DeLuna and the Villa Capri and all of these different incidents. You have a question? Come on up.
Lefty Rosenthal. Why wasn't he ever indicted, and did he ever assist under the radar or in any assistance in the case?
Yeah, I really can't discuss Rosenthal one way or the other. I'm familiar with him, and certainly DeLuna's notes cover him. But the decision was made not to go there.
And I think that's fair. We, as you guys know, who've watched previous programs at the museum, we've had journalists and others who have reported that Rosenthal was involved as an informant. But as far as we're concerned for this evening, nothing is official. So it's not an official thing. It's a good question, though. Makes sense. Why wouldn't he have been indicted? Any other questions? Come on up. While you're thinking about that, I have one last question for you, and that has to do with the strike forces. Now, you were involved, and they were actively engaged in multiple cities across the country, and then I think in the 90s they went away. So what happened? And then I think you at the time advocated for keeping them.
Yeah, I actually testified, and I had a chance to look at that videotape of my testimony. And that's where I met the current president. He was chairman of that committee, Biden. And I had forgotten that I had testified before him. The success that we were having with the strike forces in terms of prosecuting the mafia is unchallenged. The difficulty is that some of the strike force chiefs didn't get along with the U.S. attorney, tried to upstage him, that type of thing, so they made political enemies. And it was a political decision. And before they go through the motions of having the hearing. I testified, Doug Roller of Chicago testified, and other people with the strike forces testified. And it's a shame because I think they were very successful. I don't think this case would have ever been made, the straw man case, if didn't have a strike force. Because U.S. attorneys, as I said, they have an awful lot of work and a lot of cases they're handling, and they're processing paper, a lot of paper, and nothing to take it away from them. And some of them are career, or a lot of them are career people, but they're doing drug case, this case, gun case, this thing over here, a robbery, whatever. They can't put the focus on it that we could. We talked about 2 or 3 attorneys, 12 agents at least in Kansas City, and other agents in Chicago and other places, all coordinating, and Washington coordinating. That doesn't happen often. And so I thought, and still think, that we'd been better off if we'd maintained them. And you don't read about very many mafia cases anymore. There have been some, but and if there are, they're usually one of the big cities like Chicago or New York, where they have more talent and more depth and more experience. They get more serious crimes usually too than some of the other cities, and it's a real loss, I think, because as Jeff said, the LCN is still active. The mafia is still alive and well in many cities. We didn't impact New York at all. We didn't impact Buffalo or New Jersey and so forth. Yeah, I thought it was a bad decision, but, politics is what it is, and, you don't upstage the U.S. attorney, you're just asking for trouble. And some of them did that, and despite all the good work we did, politics is what politics is. Somebody did a favor here and a favor there, and it all works out.
Yeah. Very good. So do we have another question? Please come on up to the microphone.
I was wondering if you could identify these three gentlemen on the poster. And
One on the right, or my left, is Frank Rosenthal. The one in the middle is Glick. Is that
Frank Ballesteri.
Frank Ballesteri? Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was Frank, out of Milwaukee, the head of the Milwaukee family.
And were they all three involved with Stardust?
Yeah, all three of them. Frank Rosenthal was responsible for skimming from the Stardust and the other casinos Glick owned. Glick was the owner, and Rosenthal was getting part of the skim because he had one of the votes that with the pension fund.
Because I understood that the Tropicana was very involved with the Kansas City mob.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
could have, when we did the design for this graphic, we could have had the Tropicana in the picture as well, and we didn't, but we also sort of picked these pictures somewhat randomly, so I don't want to read too much into that. But these were clearly some prominent characters in the story, and we thought the pictures worked well
Yeah, I wouldn't
together.
have picked Frank Ballesteri because in relation to Chicago and Kansas City, he wasn't that important.
Yeah.
But he was important enough to get Skim, and his kids, by the way, two lawyers, part of the deal was Glick signed a contract with them permitting them to purchase 50% interest in the Argent Corporation for $25,000.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, I think we're wrapping it up. Thank you all very much, and please thank David Helfrey for his time.
Thank you. Thank you.